Well done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Eitan, let me start by asking what inspired this? Where does this all come from?
I'm from there. That's where I grew up. I was born in Jerusalem in this neighborhood, and that's where I went to school, and that's where I went to the Boy Scouts. And I went to film school in Jerusalem, and after film school, I stayed and I lived in Ein Karem. And when I was 28, I decided to move to Tel Aviv for very trivial reasons. My job was in Tel Aviv, and I was single at the time, and all the girls I wanted to date were in Tel Aviv. So I left. And then 12 or 15 years go by, and I get invited to a reunion of my elementary school class. And I realized that out of 35 kids in my class, only 2 stayed in Jerusalem. And so, and that's Jerusalem, that's not Flint, Michigan. So that doesn't make sense. And then I started talking about this to people, and this guy who was a technician I was working with on a TV series said, you know what happened to my sister? My younger sister, she's a pianist, and she went to Jerusalem to study the pipe organ, and she got some threat mail because they thought she was a missionary, and someone broke into her house, and she went back to Tel Aviv. And I said, could you run with what? And that's sort of how the story began, because that's not a story, it's just a troubling piece of information, which I researched, and I just had to find a better ending for it. First of all, I had to find the story, but also a better ending than she went back to Tel Aviv. So that's how the journey of into the film started.
It's a really well crafted film. I think our audience here too was engaged and gripped throughout, and the first of all, the performances are fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about the actors in the film?
Well, they're all friends of mine because it's a very low budget film. So lucky for me, I have very talented friends, and they all came, practically for nothing, except of course for Anya, who was not a personal friend but a friend of a friend, and she's a star in Israel, and even before Game of Thrones. So she read the screenplay, and she said some of this is about she said, how did you know about that scene? That really happened to me. She was talking about the scene with the father, where the father sort of says, what are you going to do without your piano? That's a scene from Anya's life. It only happened to her when she was 16 and not 30-something. She was a pianist. She was a classical pianist, and then she quit, and her dad was devastated, and she said that was the only time in her life that she heard him scream. So that was, it immediately hooked her into the film. And then there was the boy, which was, I knew I didn't have a casting director. I had to cast myself. So I went and looked for pianists, because I didn't want young pianists. I didn't want to do the thing when you have to cut from this to that. I wanted a pianist. So I went to see, and this guy was the first kid that I saw. And I was totally blown out, but said, no, it can't be true. So I went and saw 3 or 4 more others, and then I realized that I was just very, very lucky with Lior, which is he really is a pianist, and he plays with the Philharmonic Orchestra, and he's just he's a prodigy.
And he memorized all his lines so beautifully. That's really another talent these kids have to have. Speaking of the music in the film, there's a lot of thought, I think, was put into the music. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the themes and inspirations that you were most impacted by, that kind of helped drive the film throughout, and where you encountered them?
There's when I was in Tallinn, the film was the international premiere was in Tallinn Film Festival, where we won the Grand Prix, and Anya won Best Actress. And Tallinn is home for Arvo Pärt, who is a personal idol of mine. That he's the most performed contemporary classical music composer, which is basically he's the only reason I would ever, because really growing up in Israel, you don't listen to pipe organ music at all. You just don't listen to it. it's just not around. And I did study the piano for 8 years as a child. It's not in our education. But Alvo Pärt somehow fell into my my hands when I was 20 something, and I was totally blown away. And he's invented this kind of composing method he calls tintinabuli, which means like bells. And Yonatan Bar Giora, who's my composer for 15 years, he studied tintinabuli in order to write the score.
One last question before I open it to questions from the audience, and you might have to explain some plot twists too. But what's next for you? What are you working on now? What's kind of in the oven?
Well, I've received a development grant from the Israeli Film Fund to write a new new feature, which is sort of in the it sort of deals with the same themes, but in a different world. That's hopefully the next project, but you never know.
Very cool. I'd love to take questions from the audience. Before we get to the audience, I also wanted to mention a big thank you to our partners, and especially for this film, we had a group from Yisrotel that came in together. You've probably watched their commercial about a dozen times before the films, and a big thank you to Yisrotel for being a part. Yes, sir.
How are you today? Before I ask my question, I want to say that in the States, when we grow up, we don't listen to pipe organ music either. And also that my father lived in Jerusalem for a few years back in the 50s. Would it be more realistic, it's not a criticism, that if they thought she was a missionary, they would confront her and say, why are you going to the church? Are you a missionary? Or threaten to take her to a Beit Din rather than, wouldn't they think that she's entitled to a hearing or something like that? That's my question.
Well, I don't think they would, because basically what she's facing is, this one guy who's kind of, he doesn't want to talk. He's not into dialogue. So I don't think he would want to, confront her and, really ask a question or hear the answer. That's what I think.
What I'll also say about this film specifically is that it's it's fiction. It works well as fiction. I think that's what drives it. I think it plays with more fictional genres and not necessarily a style that is looking for a form of realism at all. There is some realism there, as you told, from the background, and I think in the reality there is some realism there. But there's also you really enter here a cinematic world where reality, you can question. I'm sure, why didn't they do this? Why is she going back into that room? Why is she? That's what happens in movies. That's how drama works.
Yes, I'm not a documentarist, so I don't feel this. I don't feel. I treat facts as inspiration. And movies, films take so long to take that, at least in Israel, it takes so long to finance them that by the time you really get, the fact would change by the time you would finish your film. So there was really no point in chasing after the fact, especially not in a place like Kiryat Yovel where daily things change. So what I did was, okay, I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to tell it in the way that would appeal, first of all, to me as someone would have to see it hundreds and hundreds of times. So I thought about Polanski, and I thought about Kieślowski. Those are my inspirations for this film, and I hope you can see that it's also a tribute to them.
There's a question over here.
Despite what you just said about facts, does this portray what the culture in the Haredi community, in your experience? I mean, this is extremely disturbing.
Well, I don't think it would be okay for me to say a lot about how things inside a community which I'm not a member of and I only know from the outside are. It would, I don't think it's something that I would aspire to do. It's just, I do know a lot about it. It's not like I had an army of researchers working for me. It's a lot of memories that I know. It's a few conversations. It's a couple of conversations with the girl that, the tiny little story happened to. I don't know. Again, it's not a documentary. It's certainly not a documentary about the Haredic community.
I will mention, I'm not as kind as Eitan. I will mention that this is a stressful point within Israeli society, and if you follow the press at all, and I'm sure if you there's beyond the press, I see on Facebook, I saw a couple of weeks ago a secular woman being beaten and having her cell phone thrown to the ground because she was somehow involved with the Orthodox community in some ways. And it is a point of tension, and this is a piece of fiction, and I mean, for me it plays a little bit more on a horror level, but there's definitely a criticism there that I saw, that I related to, that I felt is built in reality.
Well, I really, in terms of criticism, I think I feel more free to criticize my own my own community or lack of community, because I feel that we have so much that is when you encounter a Haredic community and you sort of suspend your criticism for a second and you think about, wow, they have a lot of strength, right? And they seem to have a lot of stuff that we don't, like a sense of maybe sometimes a sense of joy that we lack, and sometimes they are totally disrespectful of the market, of prices, of budgets, of things that just have only material value. And maybe us as someone, for instance, Nomi, when she's asked why she has nothing to play for because she didn't get the prize. So what do we have, as a secular society to offer ourselves? Do we have a sense of community? What makes us come together? What brings us joy? What do we play for other than money? That's criticism enough, I think, for one evening. Sorry.
I'm curious, how did they let you film in the area? Where did you film it exactly in this Haredi area?
Yes, I did. And another upside of filming on a shoestring budget is that you don't have a truck, and you don't have a big camera and a big crew, and basically, we came with a car. So how
And
would
a parking ticket, of course.
yeah, we ignored those. So they hardly noticed that we were there. It's not Mea Shearim again. It's not like or Bnei Brak. It's not a very. It still is a sort of mixed neighborhood, and people of all kinds still go there. So no one asked us any questions. We filmed.
How'd you film that last scene there on the when she walks across that?
Again,
deck there?
no budget for stunts. She was up there, and she was up there, and she was tied by one cable, and it was windy. And I hope she forgave me. We're friends, Anya and I. So I guess by now she's forgiven me for doing that to her.
There's a question up there. You need to talk into the mic.
What is the symbolism of the boy not speaking, the young pianist, the young boy?
I don't know if it's a symbolism, but it certainly is about he doesn't, he literally doesn't have anyone speaking for him or listening to him. Because everyone seems to, know better than he is what's best for him, what he should study and what he shouldn't study. And, if I continue my lecture tonight, it's, maybe it's somebody's job to speak for him.
We're going to take one last question over here. I saw someone with their hand up. Yeah, the microphone's coming your way.
Years ago, I saw a movie with Rossellini, forget her first name, Isabella Rossellini, in which it took place in Belgium with a very frum family, and she was a completely secular babysitter or a nanny or whatnot, and they had a child also who had major problems, and she got very involved with the family, and at first they rejected her, then they accepted her. Excuse me? Oh. Were you familiar with this movie before? No. There's a lot of cross currents with that movie.
I'm sorry, I don't know that film.
We'll find it for you. IMDb, I'm sure will allow it to. I'm sure you can find it. It rings a bell for me. I'm not remembering exactly. Eitan, I want to thank you for sharing this film with us and being here.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you.